we're going to see that in chapter 10, he starts this section with, some endearing words. And we notice that he's already talked about some of Israel's mistakes in the Old Testament. That was the first section of chapter 10. And he said, these things were written for you as an example, right? So in other words, don't follow their pattern, because even though all of them were blessed, baptized into Moses, delivered out of Egypt, drank of the water, Christ followed them, ate manna from heaven. With most of them, God was not pleased. And many of them fell in the wilderness. And so he says, don't go there. And then he talked about, you're going to have trials and be tried to be seduced by Satan, but take heed lest you fall, because you can endure it and God will provide a way of escape. That's where he now goes into this section in verse 14 through the end of the chapter where he talks about idolatry. And therefore, my beloved, this is a term that's not used. I don't know if it's used, this actual term anywhere else, but it's an endearing term. And at this time, with all the things they got going wrong in this congregation, it's kind of surprising where Paul, rather than coming down stern and hard, says, my beloved. And it's a term of endearment. And he says, run from idolatry. That's what the word flee is. It's to escape for your life. And so that's what this whole section is about when we're talking about Christian liberties and whether we're to exercise them or not. We see in the first section the negative example of Israel. Because, first of all, they made a golden calf, didn't they? That's outright idolatry. But the other things were not so obviously issues of idolatry, but we'll see that they were in the end. And because idolatry takes many forms. And so the whole theme here is whatever you do in word or deed, make sure you do all in the name of the Lord. Make sure God gets the glory for everything. That's where we're going to end up. And I got to get to the right slide. I thought I started there. Here we go. And so now we're going to have what I call some table talk. And because you cannot eat the table of the Lord and also the table of demons. Well, I thought we were talking about. We'll try to explain that. And so these are going to be some very practical to give us that you can't do both. And so as Christians, we have to make a conscious decision for the rest of our life. We're going to serve the Lord and Him only. And so when we see this idea of flee from idolatry, the word flee, as I mentioned, means to run for your own safety. Idolatry, this word here, is the practice or the worship of idols. So we're going to talk about what an idol is, but this is serving an idol. So flee from anything that looks like, feels like, or is worship or service of an idol. Now, why would Paul have this lengthy section about idolatry? It's a problem. All right, that's the answer I wanted to give. Now, I know it's not a problem for us today, and so, but we need to be reminded there's probably more said about idolatry in the Bible than any other subject. It was a problem that afflicted God's people all the time, and we're going to learn his attitude about it, but it's a problem today as well. And we'll see that that's the case, that people serve a false god all the time because we're made to worship something. In Galatians chapter 5, we see it's a work of the flesh as opposed to a fruit of the Spirit. We see in Colossians chapter 3 that greed, to have lots. He says that amounts to idolatry. When you just live to accumulate, doesn't matter what it is, money, stuff, that's idolatry because you're serving it. We see in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 3 that often it's accompanied with sexual immorality. And so the Corinthians were so bad. There was a term that was used to describe someone that just went over to the bad side or the dark side or just total decadence. They were Corinthicized. All right? Can you imagine that? Oh, they've been Corinthicized. Because it describes someone like the Corinth, with all the immorality involved in, especially in their temple worship and the temple prostitutes. Now, we might say, hey, they've been to Vegas, all right? Or what would we say that would be an equivalent? I don't know. But that's the attitude the reputation Corinth had. And so Paul is saying, you're coming out of this. You have to make sure you don't go back to it, and you don't even have a hint of it. So idolatry starts, the command against it, when God gave the 10 Commandments, right? And we'll go back to chapter 20 of the book of Exodus, where he says, I am Jehovah, your God. I am the one that brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of slavery. That's how he starts so many of his introductions. I'm the one that bore you out on eagle's wings. I'm the one that saved you. I'm the one that redeemed you. So he says, accordingly, I don't want any other gods before me. So anything that comes before God in our life serves as an idol. You understand that? Anything. See, idolatry can take many shapes and forms. We're too sophisticated to bow down to a carven image, but that does not mean we cannot serve idols still today. And so he says, no other gods. Don't make for yourself an idol. Any likeness what is in heaven, above, or on the earth, beneath, or in the water, or under the earth. You shall not worship them, and you shall not serve them. Now, it couldn't be any clearer. You know, we can read in the Old Testament, if we took the time, God hates idolatry. It's an abomination to him. And it's because, well, first of all, there are no idols, and he is the only God. And after all the things he does, it's a personal offense to him if we were to worship an idol and not him. Now, this whole instruction asserts that you're going to worship something. Do you understand what I'm saying? When he says, don't worship false gods, implied in that, we're built and designed to worship. Yeah. We're going to worship something, and it's just a matter of who are we going to worship, God or an idol? And that's why he starts with the 10 Commandments. Don't go there. I am the only true and living God. There is no other God. And we will worship something. So there's only two choices. A God himself, the God, or an idol of our making. Because notice what the command said. Do not make for yourself. So this is what happens. When you in your life or a person chooses not to worship God. By the way, Jesus said you got to love God with what? All your heart, all your mind, all your soul, all your strength. What does that leave left over? Not much, right? So when you choose to not serve God with your entire being, he's number one and the only one. See, it doesn't mean you have second, third, and fourth. He is the only one. When you choose not to serve him, what's the only alternative? To make an idol. Because there are no other gods, so you got to dream up one. You have to make one. Now that's what's implied here, well actually stated. Now sometimes people make idols to represent God himself. See, that's what the golden calf was. They said, here is your God who delivered you. It's a calf. But that's, it's contrary to who God is. Sometimes it's something totally different. But when you turn from God, you make something else into a God that is going to lead you and you're going to serve him.
Even when the golden calf was destroyed, kings later did the very same thing. Kings of Israel, they built the calves over it.
Yes. All right. Now, here's something important. Since we're all made to worship, you cannot eliminate God from your life without creating God-like substitutes. We're made to worship. So, now that being said, we have a society that has shifted in many ways from a God-fearing nation to a godless. Does that mean that Americans do not serve a God. No, implicit in this instruction is if you're not going to serve God, you will create a substitute for him. And they have done that whether they're aware of it or not. And that's why Paul says, run, flee from idolatry. The only way you can deal with idolatry is go the other way. What other thing did he say to run from in the book of Corinthians? Immorality, fornication in chapter 6. The only way you can deal with that temptation is to run the other direction. You're not strong enough. You'll get caught up in it. He puts idolatry right there the same way with it. Because it's so seductive and it's so subtle. Because it creeps into our life so quietly and without fanfare, we can become idol worshipers and not even know it. And that happened, as Dave pointed out, with the children of Israel over and over and over again. So notice then as we go on. In Romans chapter 8, Paul puts it this way when he's talking about, you got to decide who you're going to serve. And he's talking about people that are Christians, that have already been saved. And he wants them to live a sanctified life since they've already been justified in the blood of Christ. He says, those who are according to the flesh set their minds on things of the flesh. Now, what does it mean, set their minds on? A decision, preeminence, what? Focus. It's what preoccupies their thinking, their desires, their ambitions. And so, there's two things we can do. We can be preoccupied with things of the flesh or things of the Spirit. Now, Paul's going to say in Galatians, they're in opposition to one another. You can't do both. Things of the flesh or things of the Spirit. The mindset on the flesh is death. Always lead to death. But the mindset on the Spirit is life and peace. Because the mindset on the flesh is hostile towards God. Because you cannot serve God when you're serving the flesh. You make yourself an enemy of God. For it does not subject itself to the law of God, for it is not able to do so, and those who are in the flesh cannot please God. So here we're going to learn some other things about idolatry. Anything other than things of the Spirit. This is an awkward way to say it. Anything other than a mindset on the Spirit, which preoccupies our heart or our mind. Are those interchangeable words? Heart and mind? And yes, there's no difference between the heart in New Testament scripture. It's speaking of the mind. What your affections are set on, what you think about, what you dwell on, what you focus on. Anything other than things of Spirit that occupies your mind is your idol. So, can idols take many shapes and forms? Now, what would be some example of those?
Could be a car.
A car. Could that be your idol?
A hobby.
A hobby. All right? Now, a hobby's bad.
No.
But can they become an idol that you serve? That's the issue. Yes.
Your job.
Your job. If your status, your security, food, shelter, and clothing, your self-image is based on your job and not Christ, it's your idol. In other words, if you lost your job, you'd feel bad about yourself, you'd feel insecure, and you feel like life's not worth living. That demonstrates it's what? It's not Christ who is your life. It's not Christ in whom you trust. It's not Christ in who you get your self-image. It's your job. That job is your idol. You see the difference? What some other things can be our functional idol in our lives? Science, knowledge. We trust in science and knowledge to cure everything rather than God. What else? I'm sorry? Entertainment. Can it be an idol? What gives me joy is not Lord. Rejoice in the Lord. Again, I say rejoice. He is my joy. He is my source of, comfort. But when it's entertainment and not Christ, and you lose the entertainment, and now you're sad and depressed, that's a sign that what? You have an idol in your life. Yes. Adrenaline. That's right. A weird one. Yes. Exercise. Self-image and all those things. Identity, right? Rush Limbaugh. I didn't catch that, but yeah, that's right. Technology. How about the alcoholic? Does he have an idol in his life that he serves? Yeah. It gives him his joy. It dulls his senses. It gives him safety or refuge from life's problems. Or maybe just an outlet or a sense of pleasure. There's a lot of reasons that a person might drink, but they serve the drink, don't they? Can an alcoholic's wife be an idolater as well? Because she defends her husband's reputation to others, so he's in denial that he has a problem, and she'll defend him in front of others. And she'll enable him to continue to drink because she thinks it's her fault that he does. And so her relationship with her husband's more important than her relationship with Christ. And so she enables him to drink. Who is her functional idol in her life? Her alcoholic husband. Do you see that? You say, well, this is getting weird. That's why it's so scary, because idolatry is such a subtle thing and how it can creep in your life. When anything is your focus and preoccupies your mind other than Christ, it's your idol. And I'm talking about to a certain degree. You can think about things in this world, you understand, as a hobby and all that, but what's your main focus and priority? Quickly.
The leaders of Israel had a problem with horses, and God told them about that.
That's right. They trusted in, that's right, rather than him. That's why he said, don't make alliances with nations. Trust in me. Yes. That's right. Yeah, it was stuff.
And the one that the thief had chosen the better, not that doing the housework was, there was something better at that time.
That's true. Okay, listen to some comments about idolatry. Idolatry is worshiping God in the wrong way. When you have, here's the estimation of who God is and what he wants from us, and I say, I choose to worship God this way, my way. Well, notice this. Psalms 106, verse 19 and 20. They made a calf in Horeb. That's that golden calf. And they worshipped a molten image. Thus they exchanged their glory for the image of an ox that eats grass. Were they worshiping God? Yes, but in the right way? No. What were they practicing? When I worship God the way I want to worship and not the way he wants to worship, I'm serving an idol. I'm not serving the true and living God. That's a big problem in the denominational world all now. It's all about going to worship to please yourself. It's interesting. It used to be in the religious world of Paul's day, you appease gods, you placated gods so they would not destroy you. Now we create gods that please us and placate us and entertain us. That's what's happening in the world today. Total reverse. All right? How about this? Idolatry is anything we submit to other than God himself. Philippians chapter 3 and verse 19, I quoted that or had it up there. He talks about those of the world whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite. Isn't that interesting? It's what makes them feel good, what satisfies their desires. That's their idol. Whose glory is in their shame, and they set their mind on earthly things. Ezekiel chapter 14 and verse 3. Son of man, these men have set up idols in their hearts and have put right before stumbling block of iniquity. So anything you worship in your heart other than God is your idol. Idolatry is going to defile you. It will destroy you from the inside out. Ezekiel chapter 20, I said to them, cast away each of you the detestable thing of his eyes, and do not defile yourself with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. There's something about idolatry. We're going to see in here in this letter, you're worshiping at the table of demons. And that's what's scary. Now, there's no such thing as another God. There's only one God. But there is a demon world, is there not? Yes. And the ones that's going to seduce you to worship anything other than God is Satan himself. And when you sit down at the table of an idol, you're actually communing with demons. So, well, no, now we're getting really weird. Well, that's what Paul's going to talk about, because if we believe in a spiritual realm where God exists, we have to accept the opposite, the evil forces of darkness that Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 6. There is a demonic world that you don't want to go to. All right? Richard Keyes explains it this way. An idol is something within creation that is inflated to function as God. All right? An idol can be a physical object, a property, a person, an activity, a role, an institution, a hope, an image, an idea, a pleasure, a hero. Anything can be a substitute for God. Ancient idols were nothing more than symbols used to get what we selfishly desired. Because idols were made in what? Man's image, what he wanted. All right? In our modern materialistic society, our deities are no longer objects that need to be appeased or placated, but as I said, but rather things that appease or placate us. The ultimate goal, this is the ultimate goal in idol worship, to have things to please you. It's not about God, it's about our gods pleasing us. So Acts chapter 7, at the same time, speaking of Israel, they made a calf, brought a sacrifice to the idol, and they were rejoicing in the work of their hands. Now that's very significant. Who fashioned that golden calf? God? No. Man made it. And they drank, and it was implied in 1 Corinthians 10 earlier in the chapter, there was sexual immorality in this worship, and they rejoiced in the product of their creation. Now that's very important we understand that. So notice our next slide here. In Romans chapter 1, this is a powerful passage where Paul talks about the Gentile worlds that do not accept God, and so they create their own gods. Notice what he says in verse 21. Even though they knew God, see, God's made himself available to everyone, not excuse. They did not honor God, him as God. Is that a choice? Yeah. Now, when you choose not to honor God, you will always substitute a God in your making. You cannot live in a vacuum. You will worship something. So they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. See, it defiles you. You become decadent because you can't think straight. Professing to wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of a corruptible man. This is what's really interesting. They exchanged the image of God, and now they worship the image of man. See, man wants God to become like themselves. God wants man to become more like him. When we worship the true and living God, we become like that which we worship. When you worship an idol, you make God like you, and you become like the God you made. And you don't want to go there because that never turns out well. So there's what we see here. Idolatry is anything we submit to. It's anything we worship in the heart. It'll defile you, and you're going to become just like that which you worship. I don't care if it's food, money, whatever it is. This is really serious. So the question is, what rules in your heart? Does Jesus rule supreme in your heart in things, or is it something else? If it's something else, that's your idol. And sadly, a lot of people struggle putting idols away. That's why Paul's writing to the Corinthians. But what's he calling them? My beloved. He understands this is a struggle that every person has, and we have to work through as we become more like Christ. Yes?
The scary thing is the first sentence up there, because it says, even though they knew God, everyone sitting in this building
They know him.
We know him. But here's the kicker, they don't honor him, so some of us sitting here might not honor him as we should. And here's another one, or give thanks.
Give thanks.
So it's almost looking inside your heart and looking for, do I have gratitude in my soul?
Right.
Or has it been replaced with ingratitude and lacking this, and I don't have this,
Yeah.
and on and on, and you're not a thankful person?
Yeah, giving thanks is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's honoring God and putting him in his proper spot in our life. All right, so with that all being said, let's go through our text. So verse 15, he said, I'm speaking to you as wise men. I mean, you're able to discern things and ask the right questions and come to the right conclusion. That's what he's speaking of here. And so Paul's building them up. He says, you know this is true. I'm speaking to you as wise men. You judge what I say. Make that discernment. In other words, put your thinking cap on, ask these right questions, and understand what I'm saying is true. So now Paul's going to ask a series of questions. And the answer is going to be obvious. Is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? We'll talk about this because you might be like, huh? Is not the bread which we break a sharing in the body of Christ? Since there's one bread, we or many are one body, for we all partake of one body. Look at the nation Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifice sharing in the altar? That's the third question. Verse 19, what do I mean then? Fourth question, that a thing sacrificed to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? No. But I say the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I don't want you to become sharers in demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We're not stronger than he is, are we? Well, of course not. So let's break this down and unpack it, because you might be lost in all this table talk, the bread talk, the cup talk. Well, let's make some sense of it. The cup of blessing was he's referring to the last cup in the Passover ceremony. Because when they kept the Passover every year, they had several cups of fruit of the vine they offered. The last one was called the cup of blessing. Our best indication, it was this time Jesus took the cup and instituted his Lord's Supper. It's a cup of blessing where you're thanking God. He used this time to say, this cup is my blood shed for your sins. So he says, is not the cup of blessing we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? Now we have to understand that word sharing. It's the word koinonia. Have you ever seen Koinonia House? It's a denomination, and it's all about this word, the Greek word. And when you translate it, it means fellowship, communion, or partnership. It's probably the one most misunderstood and misused words in the Christian world. Fellowship today in the Christian circles is just getting together and spending time together. And it could be playing golf, or just having games, or just eating a dinner, or having a cup of coffee. We shared some nice fellowship. That's not what the word means in the New Testament. It's been polluted with just our culture today and reduced to nothing down than just having a good time. Fellowship means communion. It means partnership. We're grouping together to achieve a common goal. And he says, when you partake of that cup, he's talking to Christians, you're partnering with the blood of Christ. Whoa, it's a whole new spin on the communion. It doesn't cause us to remember the blood, but we're acknowledging we are participating in that. Just as that blood was shed to make me pure, we renounce all things of the world, and we're going to be true to you, God. Do you understand what I'm saying? We're dying to the world just like you died to the world, and we're going to live for you. You're sharing in that. Does that make sense? Paul said, Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, it's no longer that I liveth, but Christ, I have died, but Christ liveth in me. He said, I've been crucified with Christ. You're partnering with that. You're sanctifying him as Lord of your life. And he says, same thing with the bread. We're sharing in the body of Christ. We're partnering. He says, take my life, let it be. I'm all yours. It's no longer about me and my desires. It's all about you. When every time you eat that bread, you're partnering with that cruel death on the cross. You understand what I'm saying? I'm dying to the world. So I never thought that way. And Paul says, that's what's happening. Now you can't eat this table, then go a long way and participate in the table of demons, of idolatry. You can't do both. So, well, explain yourself, Paul. We'll try to. Yes?
Well, with those Corinthians, and what was so prevalent in their society was the feasts that were held in pagan temples.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like a comparison of the temple feasts of
Right.
demons, basically, and then you have the table of the Lord.
All right, so since you're bringing that up, Paul was addressing a specific issue with them. We're making a broader application. The specific issue is, as Ann was saying, if you didn't hear her, there was a idol temple there in Corinth, and all meat was sacrificed to idols, and it was sold in a meat market. And so if you were eating meat at home, chances are that's where it came from. A meat market that sold meat that was offered to an idol. Well, they also had dining places at these temples too. And so the Christians thinking there's no such thing as an idol, there's only one God, so I can go in there and eat this meat in the temple's dining area, all with all good conscience. And that's what he's going to be addressing. He said, don't even go there. So what? Don't even go there. We'll explain that in just a second. All right? To share in the Lord's table is to share in his death. You're partnering. You're agreeing this is right. This is what I'll do too. So notice what he says. Since there's one bread, we or many are one body, and we all partake of one bread. We're all in this together, aren't we? And so just as God sent his son and died for us, it's reciprocal back the other way. We come and we partner as one, renouncing the world and rejoicing in a relationship with God. And he said, Israel, didn't they eat the sacrifice of the altar? Didn't they do it? And he said they were sharers in the altar. When they ate of it, they're participating in this sacrifice that was given for their sin. So it goes both ways is what he's saying here. And so with that being said, here says, what do I mean then? Is an idol really anything? And what's the answer? No. But the Gentiles sacrifice to these idols as though they are real. Is that true? And here, Paul says they're actually sacrificing to demons. And I don't think he's being figurative. I think he's being literal. Since there's no such thing as an idol, who's the one that's selling the concept of idols, false gods? Satan. And when you go down and partner with them, in any way, you're partnering now with Satan. That's what he's saying. He uses that word. They sacrifice to demons and not to God. I don't want you to become sharers in demons, partnering with them. And he's trying to say as clear as he can. You can't have it both ways. You have to make a clean break from the world. Total clean break. It's either with God and connected with him or with Satan. This is a strong, strong passage. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, speaking of idolatry, they sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately. See, this concept's not new. In Psalm 106, they sacrifice their sons and daughters to the demons. They're actually giving up their children to appease these false gods, but he actually says they're doing it to Satan. Satan is alive in this world, and he's trying to seduce every one of us. And he knows that we're smart enough not to bow down to a stone-carved idol or a graven image or pray to some saint. See, we're beyond that, hopefully. But if you read your astrology, if you go and look at your horoscope, if you have your palm read, you're partnering with demons. I can't say it any clearer. If you're putting your trust in things like that, you're sharing in the table of demons, not with God. Well, I can't go out tonight because my horoscope says I can't. Now, there are Christians that live that way, right? Superstition. I know ball players are superstitious. They'll wear the same socks for every game because they won a game in that. Now, if you're that superstitious, you're putting your trust in things and not in God, and that's partaking in the tables of demons.
I
Yes.
like the way one of the prophets came back to one of the kings when they conquered one of the cities. They took the idols from their enemy, brought those idols back, and they worshiped those idols. And the prophet came to the king and said, how can you commit this great sin among Israel? The same idols you now worship, did they save that city from you conquering them, and now you're going to set them up and serve them?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he suffered
Yeah.
the
No. It's just crazy, and we go, well, what if the stock market falls? What's going to happen to my retirement? And people lose sleep over that. Now, there's a difference between concern and anxiety and depression, right? Can the stock market and our 401k become our idol? If my security and trust is in it and not in God, what happened in the Great Depression? 29. I know none of you were alive except Ray. Everyone lost everything. People jumped out of buildings in New York to their death because it was all over. Was God their God? No, they were serving an idol, obviously, because everything was pulled out from among them, so they thought. It's so subtle, but it happens so real. He said, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake. That's the word communion, fellowship, partner. The table of the Lord and the table of demons. Are you going to provoke the Lord to jealousy? Because what did he say in the Ten Commandments? I am a jealous God. I will not stand for you worshiping anyone else but me. Now, is that because he's, I don't even want to say it. Why is that?
It's in our best interest.
Because we're the prize of his
Because he
creation,
loves
and he wants his creation to serve him.
He's a prize. He's a what?
It's because he loves us, and for
He
us
loves
to
us.
do that is detrimental to us, and so he's
It's-
jealous for us.
It's detrimental to us if we worship false God. What? It hurts us.
Can I just get a real quick recap? I've never gathered this before, so I really appreciate what you're saying. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding that they would take the meat offered to the idols
Yes?
and serve it in the temple like a restaurant.
That's what I understand.
Some Christians were thinking, well, it's no big deal because I know that that's not quote unquote bad meat.
Right.
So I can go there to eat.
Yes.
Paul is saying, wait, others see you go there, but yes, all things are lawful, but not all things edify.
All right. You're saying it right. So let's look at that. All right. Here are our liberties. We're going to ask the four things before I engage in something. First, is it lawful? Second of all, will it expedite? Your Bible might say profit. He said all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. Then will it build up or tear down? Will it put others first? Now, where do I get this from? This is what Wayne was just addressing. It's in verse 23. Paul says, okay, let's make some application. All things are lawful. Does that mean everything? Yeah, I'm sorry? All these things we're talking about. Yeah, eating a meat offered to an idol is lawful because he already said in chapter 8, there's no such thing as an idol, so the meat's not contaminated. We that have knowledge understand that. That was 1 Corinthians 8. But then he said, not everyone has that knowledge. So, yeah, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. That means to expedite, bring things together, not hinder, but cause the growth of an individual and the church collectively. We can do things that you have a right to do, but will cause problems in the church and in other people's lives. And because of that, you should not do them, even though you have a right to engage in them. Since they hinder and don't expedite people's growth and the cause of Christ, you stay away from them. All right? And we'll give some examples here. But the second thing is, not all things edify. That means build up. We want to do all things for the building up of a Christian to become more like Christ. We never want to do anything or say anything that will bring them down spiritually. All right? And so, thirdly, let no one seek his own good. This is a tough one because this is contrary to our American society. Paul put it this way in Philippians 2, regard others as more important than yourself, just like Christ did, willing to forego his own rights and liberties and suffered so he could exalt you and me. So he says, never think about your own good, but that of your neighbor. Now what that means is, I have a right to do this and you can't tell me no and it makes me happy so I'm going to do it anyway. That's what he's saying. That's a wrong attitude. And he's going to say it's sinful. The activity is okay. Your attitude is sinful. Now, does this mean you can't do things for your own good? No, he's not saying that. But in these issues that could cause someone to stumble, if you take a stand that I'm going to do it because it makes me feel good, now you're seeking your own life and not theirs. That's when it's wrong. So we'll give some examples. We'll have to finish some of this next week. Here's a specific one for them. Everything that is sold in the meat market, without asking questions for conscience sake, eat it. Eat it. Now, what is he saying? If you get some meat and you don't know where it came from or what idol was sacrificed, what should you do? Just eat it. Because you know in your mind, there's no such thing as an idol. This meat's not defiled. All right? Yes?
That's along the lines of, who knows, you go to some supermarket, I don't know where my money's going to that supermarket or whether it's controlled by some group or whatever.
Right?
And I know, okay, I'm going to go buy my milk from the supermarket. I don't know what happens to my money afterward. I really don't care.
That's right. That's right. Okay, second of all, but if one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, invite you where? Now it's implied you're going to the meat market to eat. It's coming from it. You're going to the temple. All right? But here he says, eating is set before you without asking questions for conscience sake. But if they say, this was sacrificed to idols, now what is it? It's a test. And he says, don't eat it. Not for the sake of the, he says, for the sake of the one informed you and for conscience sake. And he says, not for your conscience, because what do you know? It's okay. But you're going to do it for their conscience. He said, well, why am I being judged? No, he's not asking that. Don't let him judge you. Because what would happen? I took out Brian. We went to a idol's temple, and I told him this was sacrificed to idol this morning, and he ate it all up. He's an idolater. Now, is that fair? Is that fair for me to say that of him? No, but because of his action, exercising his liberty, knowing it was a setup, I caused people to blaspheme him, slander his name for something he can give thanks for. Does that make sense? So you mentioned milk. In West Salem, there is a Ross grocery store, and it closes, and then sometimes down about 4 or 5 buildings, there's a liquor store, and it stays open later. So the Ross is closed, and I can go down there and buy milk out of that liquor store. Could I do it with all good conscience? Should I go in there and buy milk out of that liquor store? Why?
Because someone who knows who you are may see you and misunderstand.
Just because I'm carrying a bag out with milk in it? Do you understand? Huh?
Carry it without the bag. They could have seen you walk in. They could have.
Could you go?
And it wouldn't necessarily have to be a Christian.
There you go.
It could be someone in the world.
There you go.
Hafer, without
That's
a
right.
picture, went into a liquor store.
All right. Do you understand? Now, that's a simple example, and we'll try to get some more next week as we finish this discussion. I'm just trying to give you the principles. All right? Here's the last thing, and I know we're over time, but hear what he says. I'll go to there. Whatever you do it to the glory of God. Because you have the opportunity to exalt God in your behavior or bring him low. Because what people think of God depends upon our actions. All right, we'll come back to that next week. Thank you.